Good. Hello, welcome. I'm Shannon Gilmore. I'm the Executive Director of Lincoln County Historical Association. I'm so happy to welcome you once again to our 2025 online winter lecture series. This series has been just really fun this year, and we're very excited that we have been able to reach actually hundreds of people this winter through the remote format. Through both live lectures and also through recordings. We will be recording tonight's lecture, and I'll send out that recording to you afterwards. Before we get started, I just want to take a little time for announcements and to thank our series sponsor. Our series sponsor for the lecture series is J. Edward Knight Insurance. Their longstanding commitment to our community makes this series possible, and I can't overstate how helpful they've been to us, how generous, and how much we appreciate their support. Thank you. Also very grateful to all of you who made donations. Your support, big or small, directly helps us continue offering programming like tonight's event. Don't think that your donation doesn't make a difference, because it absolutely does. We appreciate each of you and your generosity. For those of you for whom a donation is not in the cards, that's okay. We welcome you. This is a free program. We're glad to offer it that way, and we're very glad you're here. Next week, we'll be back. We'll be partnering again with our friends at Old Bristol Historical Society and welcoming David Greenham. He'll be speaking on Maine's German POW camps during World War II. It's going to be an opportunity to look closely at a topic that has been kind of a topic of Maine lore, actually, and we'll learn why the federal government was shipping German prisoners here to Maine and the lasting impact that they had on the people here in Maine during their time. And then after that, I'm very excited to announce the launch of a new program, the Members Forum, beginning on March 20th. This is a new addition to the lecture series. It has a little bit of a twist, designed to allow for more time for Q&A and for discussion. Unlike our regular lectures, where the focus has primarily been on the speaker's presentation, the Members Forum will give opportunities for direct engagement with the speaker and will allow you to connect with other participants in a more interactive way. It's designed for LCHA members, and if you're not a member, this is a great time to join us and take advantage of these membership benefits. We will be kicking this off with Corey Tanzer on March 20th, and Corey will share about her experience as an intern at Mystic Seaport. And then after that, we'll be bringing longtime member Les Fossil, who may be one of the longest members of LCHA, actually. He's an old house expert, and he will answer your questions about your old house live on the talk. It will be really interesting. So please join us to listen, to ask questions, and to enjoy a more conversational experience. Again, that starts March 20th, and then we'll continue from there. To learn more or to sign up or to become a member, visit our website, drop me an email, or check out our Facebook page. Now, on to tonight's presentation. If you have questions during the talk, please use the Q&A. And yes, I know that there is a mistake in this slide. Oh, wait, I don't have the slide up. I'm good. Jamie's slide is up. Oh, well, you're never going to know what my mistake was. But anyway, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom. And what we'll do is we'll save time for the Q&A at the end. We will record the talk. I'll send you a link afterwards, probably early next week. And with all of the housekeeping out of the way, it is finally my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Jamie Tanzer. Jamie is Special Collections and Research Services Librarian at Bowdoin College. He also serves as the Vice President of our organization, LCHA, and he's a wonderful presenter, a skilled researcher, a great storyteller, and Jamie's clear passion for uncovering little-known stories of the past just shines through anytime we talk with him. In addition to his work at the archives and his volunteer work on the board, he also gives amazing tours of the Pownalborough Court House. It's not uncommon for a guest to contact me after a tour and tell me what a great tour they had with Mr. Tanzer. He really brings history to life in a captivating way. So we're in for a great treat. I've been looking forward to this talk for, I don't know, at least a year. Welcome, Jamie, and everyone, thank you so much for being here. I will stop talking and pass it off to our speaker.
Shannon, thank you for that amazing introduction. Can you hear me okay? Is my volume good?
You sound great. I can see your slide, and I can hear you very well.
Fantastic, great. Again, Shannon, thank you for that outstanding introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're all here tonight. the slide that you see up on the screen right now in the bottom right-hand corner has my email address. And you can also find me on the Bowdoin College directory. So if you miss out on having your question read tonight, or you think of one at midnight tonight, you can email me at that email, jtanzer@bowdoin.edu, and I'd be happy to answer any questions for you. I have so many people to thank tonight, and I often leave these thank you slides to the very end of my talks, which means I forget them sometimes. So tonight, I'm actually doing it first to say thank you to all these wonderful people who have helped me do this research, people who have just listened to me throw ideas off them about this topic and see what sticks. So thank you to everybody listed here tonight. You are all a part of this project about the help from Hampton. So I am, as Shannon said, a volunteer tour guide at the Pownalborough Court House in Dresden, Maine, one of the 3 properties Lincoln County Historical Association maintains. And the building sits on the bank of the Kennebec River in the town of Dresden, Maine. The courthouse is the only remaining pre-Revolutionary War courthouse in Maine, built in 1761 to serve the then new Lincoln County. Major Samuel Goodwin and his family maintained the courthouse as live-in caretakers for the Kennebec proprietors, who'd financed its building. By 1816, the extended family came to own the house outright as the courts moved away from Dresden and to places like Wiscasset and Hallowell. And it's through the descendants of the original courthouse family, the Goodwins, that the building came into the hands of Lincoln County Historical Association in 1954, which is an amazingly long time for essentially one family to occupy a building, almost 200 years. We open the courthouse to visitors from Memorial Day to Indigenous Peoples Day every Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, anyone who works in museums knows summer days in Maine or anywhere can be fickle. Some days as tour guides, we are worked off of our feet, giving tour after tour. And some days there are significant stretches of time between visitors. Now, I often clean and just wander the courthouse on those days. And I always see things I've missed before. 2 summers ago, between visitors, I took my first long look at one of the photographs that hangs on the wall in the L of the house, which is where we meet and gather visitors for our tours, if anyone's been on a tour before. We have a lot of interesting photographs and reproductions of historic documents on the walls of the L, but this photograph of the courthouse caught my eye, and I'll show you what it was. It's this photograph right here. The photo shows the front of the courthouse around the year 1876, and the carefully written interpretive label under the photo originally read, in part, "In the doorway is Mrs. Rebecca Prescott. Her maid's name is unknown." Here's a close-up of that doorway. The unknown maid, a young Black woman, looks directly into the camera from her station just inside the front door of the courthouse. Her left arm appears prepared to steady 78-year-old Mrs. Prescott. I was intrigued by this young woman, immortalized in a photograph and clearly part of the fabric of the courthouse family, yet also somehow forgotten. I turned to the 1880 US federal census in hopes I could find the young woman's name. And I ended up finding the family. So we have Captain Samuel R. Goodwin, a great-grandson of the first proprietor of the courthouse, who is also named Samuel Goodwin. His wife, Sarah Augusta Prescott Goodwin, or Sallie, herself a great-grandchild of Major Goodwin, and thus her husband's cousin. Sallie's mother, Rebecca Johnson Prescott, was there as well, and she was the woman photographed on the steps of the courthouse. And yet another cousin, Abigail Goodwin Twycross. I can never say that name right the first time. Twycross, yet another great-grandchild of Major Goodwin. Now, the last line in the family census record reveals the name of that unknown maid, Katy, along with the strange note, no surname. We also learned that Katy is 22 in 1880, and in a section of the record I don't have shown here, Katy's birthplace is listed as Virginia. So after seeing the census record, I had even more questions. So what was Katy's surname, and how did a young Black woman from Virginia end up in Dresden, Maine? Thankfully, I had an idea of where to go for answers. When the Pownalborough Court House was acquired by LCHA, it came with a treasure trove of 3 centuries of documents in its attic, from the 1600s through the 1960s, which is an archivist's dream, by the way. Thanks to tireless work done by LCHA volunteers, this collection was inventoried, described, and then gifted to Maine Historical Society. Today, it's called the Pownalborough Court House Collection, and it is a research collection available for use at Maine Historical Society. And in fact, here is the record. It's manuscript collection 1924, if you're ever interested in having a look at it. Several years ago, Martha Vaughn dipped into this collection to write the book Sallie and Captain Sam, about the husband and wife we just saw in the census records. Captain Sam Goodwin was a ship captain for decades in the middle of the 19th century, shipping southern US goods like cotton across the Atlantic to ports in Europe. Sallie joined him on some of these trips, keeping up a shipboard diary and a string of correspondence with her extended family back in the States. And this is my copy of Sallie and Captain Sam, which features a coffee stain and sticky tabs in the edge there. Since Sallie was such a reliable writer, I wondered if I could find evidence of Katy, the young woman of color in the photograph, in Sallie's diaries and letters. In the fall of 2023, I headed to Maine Historical Society with an appointment to view several boxes from the Pownalborough Court House collection in their reading room. Within the first hour, I'd found a mention of Katy in the letters. Since then, I've read through hundreds, honestly hundreds, no hyperbole, hundreds of pages of letters, diary entries, and account books in this collection. I quickly learned that Katy was not the only young Black teenager in service at the courthouse, and the stories of Randall Johnson, Martha Jones, and Joseph Henry Jones slowly took shape. I'm presenting those stories here today because they are just as essential to the history of the Pownalborough Courthouse as any of the other stories we tell as interpreters of the property. Presenting a full picture of life at the courthouse only deepens and enhances our understanding of this special place. For more than 20 years, 4 young Black people from Hampton, Virginia, called the Pownalborough Courthouse home, and this is what I've learned of their stories. Now, it's helpful to understand Sallie Goodwin's connection to her correspondence before we go much further, and it's all family-based. And forgive me for using a very old picture, as in the people in this picture are older in years than I would normally like to use, but they're all together, which is very helpful. So Sallie was one of 3 daughters of Rebecca Johnson Prescott. And here's Rebecca Johnson Prescott. The daughters were Caroline Louise, who went by Louise, by the way, Rebecca Eliza, who was given the nickname Detty by her young nieces and nephews, and Sallie, whose full name was Sarah Augusta. Everybody's got nicknames. Now, Louise married William Canby and started a family in Philadelphia. Her children, and this is another grown picture, her children, William, Henry, Augusta, Lulu, oops, I got them switched around, and Oliver, became regular correspondents with their aunt and uncle at the courthouse. And the Canbys visited the courthouse several times a year. Detty, the other Prescott sister, never married, and Sallie and Sam never had children. So these Canby children were doted on by their extended family. Additionally, other cousins were close to Sallie and her sisters. Martha Ann Johnson, the daughter of their uncle John Johnson, was a frequent correspondent. She went by the name Patty and married General James F.B. Marshall, who became the treasurer of the Hampton Agricultural and Industrial School in Hampton, Virginia. This was a school founded after the Civil War in 1868 to educate freedmen, as well as Native Americans. Booker T. Washington was a teacher there. Patty and the general lived in Hampton for many years and were frequent visitors to the courthouse. So these were Sallie's closest family. They'd all lived with or near each other in Dresden as children, and they maintained strong familial bonds so that when they dispersed from Dresden, their connections remained and were reinforced through letter writing and frequent visits. And they frequently visited the courthouse. And now to our story. The winter of 1872 was a rough one for Sallie and Sam Goodwin at the old courthouse. Sam had broken his leg and possibly injured his hand. The injuries had upset his plans to retire from the sea and begin farming in earnest in the lands around the courthouse. Sallie, who required long stretches of bed rest due to an unnamed illness that dogged her entire adult life, struggled to keep up with the cooking and the cleaning while also nursing her elderly mother, Rebecca Prescott, and her injured husband. She likely voiced these concerns to her sister, Louise Canby, because a letter came from Patty Marshall, her cousin, about securing a domestic servant from among the Black community in Hampton, Virginia. Patty wrote on February 28th, 1872, and explained the process. I think they generally agree as to wages, and the parties who engage the servants pay the passage in the steamers. Patty went on to say, I like the idea of taking them young and training them to your own ways. But I think a young girl from the country who's rude and green will be the best to take and less likely to be homesick. Hundreds and thousands go north all the time, and I think with care and warm clothing, they stand the New England climate very well. I will be on the lookout and consult with those who know more about the business than I do and let you hear from me. Now, I think it's important to pause for a second and just note Patty's tone. Presumably, General Marshall and Patty didn't believe in the institution of slavery. General Marshall helped to end slavery with his army service and was working to establish a school to educate the formerly enslaved. Even though she likely opposed slavery, Patty still harbored prejudiced views towards Black people. In her letter to Sallie, she goes on to refer to Black girls as Topsies, who, as some of you will remember, was a character from Uncle Tom's Cabin, and as darkies, epithets meant to demean Black people. And I mention this to point out that it is possible to be both an abolitionist, which we expect Patty and the general were. It's possible to be both an abolitionist and to hold prejudiced beliefs about Black people at the same time, and many did. Sallie agreed to have Patty find her a young domestic servant from the Hampton community, and on June 24th, 1872, Patty wrote that she and General Marshall had traveled to Boston with a Black girl named Katy Brown. There they planned to place her on the steamer Star of the East and send her up to Richmond, Maine, where she could be picked up by Captain Sam Goodwin and brought back to the courthouse to begin a new chapter in her life. Patty wrote, I suppose you will not have a favorable impression at first sight, but I hope in time she will prove to be a good servant. She is green as well as Black and needs training in all ways. She has no mother, but has lived with her grandmother, who says you may keep a strict hand with her. They are not generally content to leave home, but this one, who has had little care, was glad to come. In Sallie's account book for this time, a note stretches across the top of 2 pages. June 26, 1872, Katy Brown arrived from Hampton, calling her age 13 on November 14, 1872. Katy arrived in Dresden with all of her possessions in the world: a calico dress, a hat, 2 chemises, 2 pairs of drawers, collar and a comb, and a black bag. She was not yet 13 years old and more than 700 miles away from everything she knew. Patty wrote again in August, reacting to an update from Sallie about Katy settling in. I was glad to hear such a good account of Katy, said Patty, and hope she will keep improving. I think the change from hard work and abuse must be beneficial, and I have faith that with a firm, strict treatment, she will do well. It's a great thing for her that you are willing to take care of her, and although she may not now be worth all the trouble and expense, if she turns out well, I think she may be a comfort to you. Katy's accounts for the rest of 1872 speak to her preparations for her first Maine winter. She purchased galoshes and boots for herself, as well as flannel fabric. She had 2 more dresses made for her by a local woman named Fanny, and she seemed to have taken up knitting. Katy purchased 7 skeins of blue yarn. More unpleasant tasks are recorded as well. A trip to have a tooth extracted on October 29th. Patty Marshall wrote Katy a letter in November of 1872. In her letter, Patty shared news from Katy's family, as she would often do over the next decade. Patty had been to visit Katy Cuffey, Katy Brown's grandmother, and reported that, quote, she seems greatly pleased to hear of your health and happiness and says she feels sure she did the right thing for you when she let you go to such kind people in the North, and she hopes you will be a good woman one of these days. 1 year later, in 1873, Patty had a sad update to share with Katy in a letter to Sallie. First, she told Sallie to reassure Katy that both her grandmother and her sister Missouri were well. Then she revealed a heart-rending story. Patty wrote, old Tom Hunt, Katy's grandfather, lived to get home and joined his wife after 30 years separation, he having been sold down south so long ago. But the poor old man only lived 6 weeks after he reached Hampton. I was sorry not to see him, as I had been a correspondent for his wife for a year or 2. Katy's family had been separated by the cruelty of slavery long before she was born, and a joyful reunion between her grandmother and her long-lost grandfather, Tom, wouldn't even last 2 months. Katy had never known her grandfather, and now she never would. At the courthouse, life went on for Katy. She was regularly sending money back to her grandmother in Virginia and squirreling away much of the rest in a savings account set up by Captain Sam. Household accounts show she brought trimmings for her hat, a shawl, and more fabric for new dresses. She began to learn dressmaking and purchased dressmaking forms. A black dress she had sent to her grandmother in 1874 might have been made by her own hand. How fine and happy her grandma was in her black dress that Katy sent her, wrote Patty Marshall in a letter to Sallie in March 1874. Truly the old woman, who has a deal of majesty of presence, felt proud. Katy stayed connected to her family in Virginia, but was also forging other relationships in the North. Rose, a young woman of color, also from Virginia, who was domestic servant for the Hudlett family in Dresden, became a friend, and Katy was often given leave to visit her. As Katy honed her reading and writing skills, she was encouraged to write letters to the Canby children, Augusta and Lulu, who were closest to her in age. Writing to Captain Sam in 1873, Augusta paid Katy's efforts an awkward compliment. Tell Katy I forgot in my last letter to speak of hers. I thought it very good for the first time, but hope she will improve in her next letter, and she must try and write again. Augusta and Lulu would exchange letters with Katy for almost a decade, and they spent time together when the Canbys visited Dresden. By March 1876, even Patty Marshall noticed Katy's skill with pen and paper. She wrote to Sallie, Katy's was such an elegant letter, it almost took me off my feet. Such handsome handwriting, such easy expression, and such handsome notepaper. I know such an advanced state is due to much patience and labor on your part, as well as hers. I've only managed to find one letter Katy sent from the courthouse during this time, written in June 1875 to Rebecca Prescott, Sallie's elderly mother, the woman in the doorway on the steps of the courthouse, who was away in Boston visiting. Katy wrote of the comings and goings of neighbors and guests, of Captain Sam's plans to build a pig house from lumber he purchased in South Gardiner, and of the young crops at the farm. The apple trees do look so pretty, Katy wrote, and we had a little lettuce today for the first time. Tucked tightly into one margin, almost as an afterthought, Katy wrote shyly, "Hope you will like my letter." Throughout the 1870s, Katy became more and more ensconced in the rhythms of life at the courthouse. She made regular trips to the post office in Richmond with Sallie, carefully minded the chickens on the farm, caused a sensation with her delicious molasses cakes, and grew fond of the horses on Captain Sam's new team, Dexter and Chester. But changes back home in Hampton began to draw her attention away. In February 1881, Patty Marshall wrote to Sallie with news of Katy's grandmother. "Tell Katy her grandma walked over to see me a week ago and seemed pretty well, though she says her eyes fail her. She came alone, so I think she's not nearly blind yet." It was a portent of a more serious condition to come for Katy's grandmother, one that would require Katy's intervention. On October 31st, 1881, Sallie wrote in her diary, "Katy started for Hampton on the Star of the East." But Katy's trip didn't go as planned. A promised operation to restore her grandmother's sight was canceled, and Katy remained in Hampton past the time she'd agreed to return to Maine. A few days before Christmas, she went to see Patty Marshall in Hampton and explained what had happened. Patty wrote to Sallie back in Dresden with the results of their conversation. She reported that she'd asked Katy, "Now what will you do about returning to Mrs. Goodwin?" When Katy answered that she would return to Dresden in January, Patty showed her approval and told Sallie in the letter, "I think she means to go. I guess she will go back in a better spirit, I trust, for your sakes." But the trip home to Virginia had only reminded Katy of all the friends and family she'd left behind. She'd been in Maine for nearly 10 years, a huge portion of her young life, and she longed to reconnect with Hampton. And what's more, during her visit to her grandmother, Katy had attracted the attention of a young Black oysterman, William Henry Howard. It would be hard for her to return to Dresden now. But despite her reservations, she took the steamer back to Maine and arrived February 3rd, 1882. Other changes at the courthouse were brewing. Though Captain Sam had been relying on hired hands from the Dresden community to help run the farm, he reached out to Patty Marshall in search of a Black boy from Hampton who could come and live at the courthouse and learn to work the land. By March, Patty had settled on just the right candidate, Randall Johnson, age 15. All throughout that March, Patty kept up a brisk correspondence with Sallie, sending more and more information about young Randall. R is 15 years old, pretty black, a good boy, I think. He has a sister and brothers at service in Boston. I'm sure it will be to his advantage to be with such a man as Captain G and to learn something of farming. I do hope he will turn out a comfort and treasure as Katy did. He's anxious to go on with his studies some and may someday want to go to the normal school here, but his best school now is to be with you. Mr. Johnson wished if his boy should be ill to be written or telegraphed to, all which I promised would be done. He looks healthy and well now. Some of Katy's lessons in neatness will have to be taught him. Randall arrived in Dresden on March 30th, 1882. I packed lots of books and a steamboat in Randall's trunk, wrote Patty to Sallie, commenting poignantly, "He's never been away from home before." Though she tried to be optimistic about his prospects, it was clear Randall had already expressed some reservations to Patty. She wrote, "If he likes, I think he will stay for 2 years at least. But I have told him he's not bound to more than earn his passage money and the sum spent by me for his clothing." While I haven't yet learned where Katy Brown lived when she worked at the courthouse, I was excited to find a letter from Sallie to her young nephew, Ollie Canby, describing Randall's room in enough detail to determine which room it was in the courthouse. Sallie wrote, "Uncle Sam has 2 boys now, quite as much as he can attend to. a very nice big white boy, and Randall Johnson from Hampton. He has been dreadfully homesick, but seems to be recovering. You remember the little hall chamber in the third story? That makes quite a comfortable apartment for him to occupy. We intend to have it plastered and a new floor laid as soon as we begin work, which I hope will be soon. And here is that little third floor hall chamber. And because of the evidence in that letter, LCHA is currently reinterpreting this room in the courthouse as Randall's room and hope to have it complete for the 2025 season. In the summer of 1882, Augusta Canby came to stay with her aunt and uncle at the courthouse. Randall quickly endeared himself to her. She wrote home to her brother Ollie, saying, "I want to tell you what a nice boy Randall is, so different from Katy in disposition. He's always in the best mood. I've given him one lesson on arithmetic. I find him quick at a thought." Later in the same visit, Randall presented Augusta with a basket of wild strawberries he'd picked from the field. She hulled them, and all at the courthouse enjoyed them for dessert. Sallie recorded in her account book the Christmas presents they gave Randall that year: a white shirt, suspenders, mittens, and slippers. Still, the homesickness Randall felt never loosened its grip on him, becoming ever more relentless as time went on. Randall Johnson remained at Dresden for only 1 year and 1 month before the Goodwins reluctantly sent him home on a steamer on April 30th, 1883. Katy was also to leave that spring at the end of May to return home to Hampton. But before she left, she had one final task: making sure little Martha and Joseph Henry Jones, her and Randall's successors, were comfortably settled into their new lives at the courthouse. As early as February of 1883, Patty Marshall had identified Martha and her brother Joseph Henry Jones as good candidates to be sent north from Hampton to work for Sallie and Captain Sam. Their mother Tempe had died 6 months before, and their father James at the end of January, leaving only their grandmother Hannah to care for the 7 Jones children. "It will be a great advantage to them to get away from Hampton's surroundings," wrote Patty to Sallie. "And it will be fun for them to get all they want to eat, for they look as if it had not been their experience this far." Patty described the children as best she could in further letters to Sallie. As to the girl, she's near 14 years old, has not had much training, but attends Butler's school, which is in her favor. The girl was described to me as large, but she is not at all pretty, but well enough. And I think about as promising a girl as you will be likely to find. If she has any of the good stuff of her father, she might in time be valuable. Joe is only 11 years old, but he may be taught to be very useful, although he has had no training. The boy sometimes has headache, his grandma says, and she hopes he will give him some medicine to break his headache up. After Patty dropped the children, ages 13 and 11, off at the steamship a few months later in May, she wrote to Sallie to tell her of their coming. "After such big folk as Katy and Randall, these will seem like babies to you," she wrote. "You will need to handle Martha with a strict hand. The boy showed more feeling at leaving than she did, but they both behaved very well." Martha Jones and Joe Henry Jones arrived in Dresden on May 12, 1883. In her account book, Sallie carefully recorded their birthdays. Martha A. Jones, born at Hampton, Virginia, March 27, 1870, and Joseph Harry Jones, born March 29, 1872. Martha and Joe Henry had more personal possessions with them than either Katy or Randall when they had arrived. In her trunk, along with 3 skirts, aprons, shirts, stockings, a belt, and 2 pairs of boots, Martha took with her a sewing kit, a comb, a washcloth, a fine blue and white hat, her deceased mother's pin and earrings, a Bible, and a storybook. Joe Henry had an overcoat, jacket, and 2 vests, shirts, socks, and pants, along with 2 ties, a comb, a handkerchief, and 3 books, one of which was a book of Psalms and another a storybook. The children quickly endeared themselves to the Goodwins, provoking an unusual show of gentleness from the retired Deepwater captain, Sam. Patty Marshall wrote in June of that year that she had heard a rumor that Captain Sam let little Joe Henry, quote, drop 3 rounds of seeds and then lets him take a nap in the field while he gets ready 3 more rows. When Ollie Canby came to spend the summer at the courthouse in 1883, he and Joe Henry became fast friends, milking cows, helping out around the farm, and swimming together. It's easy to love the Maine summer, but Joe Henry delighted in the Maine winter as well. He purchased a sled with his earnings just before his first Christmas in Dresden. He also developed a passion for ice skating. I had a nice pair of skates for a Christmas present, he wrote in a January letter to Oliver Canby in 1886. And we have had nice skating. It's so warm now that there's not been any skating for the last 2 or 3 days. In Dresden, Martha became a writer and a reader, composing long, engaging letters about life at the courthouse and devouring any reading material sent her way by Sallie and Sam's extended family. On the 27th of May, 1888, Martha composed a letter to Patty Marshall that reads like an ode to spring on a farm. She spoke of readying the flower beds, sending the cows out to pasture after a long winter in the barn, and churning up 10 pounds of spring butter from the happy cows. The first asparagus made its way to the dinner table, and even the elderly Rebecca Prescott was taken for a drive in the carriage. She wrote, "The weather has been perfect this week. It is very calm and warm today, and the birds are singing very sweetly. I do admire the spring of the year so. I think there's nothing prettier as when the trees are all shooting out and everything looking so green all around." A keen observer of life, Martha wrote to Sallie with exacting detail in early October 1889 about the progress of 4 hired men painting the courthouse and its new shutters, which she called blinds. It is thanks to her that we know the shutters were painted green. She described her final vision for the house with an artist's eye. When they come to get all the blinds hung, it's going to look handsome. They are what will offset the color. The house paint is a shade darker, I think, yet there is but very little difference. The trimming is quite a dark drab, which is prettier, I think. Martha found it easy to move from an artist's voice to a more practical one. "I don't expect to do much cleaning while the men are here. It is impossible," she wrote, exasperated. "Such a tramp going up over the stairs all the time. The 3rd story looks like a pig pen where they've been painting and doing all kinds of things." Joe Henry was a bit less enthused about writing, though his sense of humor about it was top-notch. In an 1886 letter to Sallie, who was away visiting family, Joe Henry wrote, "The captain told me he should put $10 in the bank for me if I would write before Saturday, so I am bound to get that $10. Though the correspondence in the Pownalborough Court House collection begins to dwindle in the mid-1890s, Sallie continued to write in her diary from time to time, mostly when important events occurred. Several of Martha's and Joe Henry's siblings had moved to Lenox, Massachusetts, to live with their Aunt Betty after their grandmother Hannah's death. By 1894, Martha was making long, multi-week visits to Lenox to see her family. And then, in November 1894, Sallie wrote fretfully in her diary, "Joe Harry Jones left us after being with us 11 years last May. What will become of him without his home and friends? He has no idea of life as he will find it in another place." And below that, a single line, "Joe Harry Jones married Mary Ann Fella in Lee, Mass, October 1897. Later on in the diary, Sallie recorded, March 6, 1901, sent by check to Martha A. Jones the amount of her savings bank book, $314.67. For the first time in 20 years, there were no more Hampton children in the old courthouse. So what happened to Katy Brown, Randall Johnson, and Martha and Joseph Henry Jones after they left Dresden? Some of their stories are happy, and some of them are terribly sad. Katy Brown married William Henry Howard on October 16th, 1883, just 5 months after returning home to Hampton. Fearing Sallie Goodwin's disapproval, Katy didn't reveal her wedding plans beforehand. 1 year later, Katy's daughter, Florence Olive, was born. Katy kept regular correspondence with Sallie Goodwin until 1886, writing of the grinding poverty that prevented the young family from progressing very far in the world, despite William Henry's steady, hard work as an oysterman. After Katy withdrew the last of her savings from her bank at Richmond, Maine, her letters to Dresden stopped. Though she becomes nearly invisible in the records after this, there is a chance that this is Katy in the 1900 US federal census for Hampton, along with her children. And it appears that she's been widowed and remarried because her last name in this record is Brooks, although 4 of her children have the last name Howard. Her last son is Brooks. Randall Johnson continued his schooling at the Hampton School. By 1885, he was teaching Sunday school and singing school there. He wrote to Sallie several times a year through the 1880s and shared with her the personal motivation that kept him moving forward. "I have the same determination now that I left Dresden with," he wrote. "First to try to be something, and then somebody." In 1887, Randall graduated from Hampton and went on to Richmond Theological Seminary, from which he graduated in 1893. He married Mary Frances Burrell 1 year later and started a family. Randall was the celebrated pastor of Moore Street Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia for many decades. Later in life, he revealed that he'd been taught to read by Booker T. Washington himself while working at Hampton as a boy. Reverend Randall Johnson passed away on December 17th, 1943. Joseph Henry Jones and his wife Mary Ann had several children in Lee, Massachusetts, where Joe Henry worked as a machinist for the electric company and a paper mill. Tragically, tuberculosis destroyed this young family, claiming the lives of his sons, Joseph Jr. and James. The cruel disease finally took Joe Henry's life as well, sometime before 1920. Joseph Henry Jones died in his 40s, leaving 4 children and his young widow. His daughter Florence died young as well, at age 22, though a photograph captured her beauty. Through her, Joseph Henry Jones has many descendants who are living today. Now, Martha. I have not been able to trace Martha Jones after the 1901 note in Sallie's diary, but I plan to continue to search for her. In September of 2023, only weeks after I'd first seen Katy Brown, Randall Johnson, and Martha and Joe Henry Jones in the Pownalborough Court House collection of papers, I was on the 3rd floor of the courthouse closing up for the night. The walls of the 3rd floor are covered with pencil and chalk signatures and drawings made by the extended courthouse family and their friends who came to stay in the 1800s. And those of you who have been there on the 3rd floor know that I am not exaggerating when I say it is a riot of writing. And the picture you see in front of you is just 3 panels of many, many panels of writing on the 3rd floor. I don't know what exactly made me pause that night and turn on my phone's flashlight in the middle of the darkening hallway to look at the wall in front of me. But in the circle of light there was one clear, small pencil signature, practiced, elegant, and sloping gently upward. I knew it immediately. Katy Brown. 150 years ago, she had stood where I was standing, pencil in hand, adding herself to the names on the wall, and thereby adding herself to the history of the courthouse. She wanted to be remembered in that place, and I hope I have honored her wish tonight. Thank you.
Jamie, what a great story. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I know that there's more to tell, and I hope that as you continue your research, we'll hear from you again. Let's see, we do have some questions, and anyone else who has questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. Going right back to the beginning, Jamie, what was the dark item in the doorpost in the old photo you showed towards the beginning?
Oh my gosh, let's go back, shall we? This will take just oh my gosh, just a second. I'm trying to think of what that is in the picture. Dark item on the doorpost.
I'm not sure. This is from Kathy, and if we can't figure out what it is, maybe Kathy will add some additional questions.
We're so close. We're almost there, everybody. Bear with me.
That's okay.
There go the Canbys in reverse. And the Prescotts in reverse.
Don't worry, we got time.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. What is that? It looks like it might be maybe a lantern holder or something like that. Something to hang a light on. That's my guess. I know it's not there today. There it is again. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It is not there today for sure. I'm going to look at it.
Oh, Mr. Probert wonders if that was a thermometer, but Lisa says she agrees it's a lantern holder.
A lantern,
this
yeah.
is becoming interactive. We have
This is great. This is great.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Great question. I wish I could blow the picture up more, but as I blow it up, it sort of pixelates and becomes very hard to see. Oh, great question. Interesting.
Okay, Linda wanted to know how again did you locate the letters? We know you covered that, but could you remind us where the letters were?
Yeah, so they're in the Pownalborough Court House collection of papers. It's M. Call 1924 at Maine Historical Society. These are trunks full of papers that were discovered in the attic of the Pownalborough Court House when it came into the possession of LCHA. And as I said, volunteers went through them and made sense out of them. And then recognizing that they could be preserved in climate control, they were gifted to Maine Historical Society. So it's hundreds of boxes of these papers. And what I did was I honed in on the time period that I expected Katy to appear in. I knew she was in the 1880 census. So I started looking, around 1880 and spread forward and spread behind in as far as dates go. And really quickly, I hit a letter that was talking about Katy. And of course, in the beginning, I couldn't assume that this was the Katy. I had to sort of read for context. But I quickly discovered that she was very much a part of the fabric of the family. So they talked about her quite a lot. They were always sort of, asking after her, talking about her, the different things she was learning. She learned to read and write at the courthouse. So there was a lot of cheering and encouraging her to write. So she appears in lots and lots of letters, but I really honed in on 1880 as my starting point, and then just read until I got a headache, and then came back and read some more until I got another headache. Yeah.
Do you feel like there's still more to uncover in that collection, or do you think you've got it?
I do. I got to a point where I was skimming, and I got pretty good at reading 19th century handwriting. Sallie's handwriting was challenging out of all of that. but I think because I had limited time, I would only take a couple of days off at a time. I think I did 5 visits. I know that every single time I went, I found more. And so I limited my searching to certain times. Um, but I think spreading out from those times, I could definitely find more. I think there's a book here.
Well, that was,
I think there might be a
to
book.
be frank, there are probably 5 people who asked that. So that was a question I was going to save for later, but is there a book here is a question.
I think so. It's such a rare situation to have, first of all, the volume of correspondence. Thank goodness for them putting all this stuff in trunks and putting it in the attic. To have the volume of correspondence and to have the family, both the Goodwin family and then the Canby family and the Marshall family papers all together, and everyone having saved essentially everything. So we not only have the letters of that family, of the courthouse family, but we have the letters that Katy and Randall and Martha and Joseph Henry wrote to the family members. It's an incredible archive of not only the people that lived in the house and were sort of satellites to that family, but the servants that we all met today, that the Hampton kids who lived there. It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
Yeah, it seems like you have a full story there.
Mhm.
As you're talking about the archives, Lisa wonders what there is besides family records. Are there also courthouse records and
Oh my gosh. Yes, it is vast. It is there are literally things from the early 1700s all the way through the 1950s and 60s. I'm getting very excited because it's one of my favorite collections. So I have to stop for a drink. There, there are, because it functioned as a courthouse for such a long time, there are writs. There are, sort of, there's Jonathan Bowman's papers there, just sort of the functionings of the building as a courthouse. There's a whole chunk of papers there because Samuel Goodwin, Major Goodwin, the first proprietor of the courthouse, was also a surveyor. Everybody had a side hustle back then. There are maps and maps and maps that are not stored with the immediate collection, but you can research through the map. I mean, there's got to be 50-ish maps that are part of the collection. There's everything you could possibly imagine. Ship's logs. Several of the people that lived at the Pownalborough Court House when it became kind of a residence were ship's captains. So there's, I don't know, 100 different ship's logs. There's so much stuff here.
it sounds like it's a rich resource for many different types of research projects.
For sure.
Moving on, I want to quickly address one question that I can answer. Sarah is asking about receiving the link to the Zoom, and I will email it to everybody who has signed up for this Zoom. I typically do email to everyone who signed up for a Zoom the recording, excuse me, the link to the recording. And it sounds like you didn't get the last one, Sarah, so maybe it landed in your spam, but in either case, I would refer you to our YouTube channel, and you can go to our website, navigate to learn, and that's a drop-down menu. Under that, you'll find the link to our LCHA YouTube channel, and you'll find everything there. So hopefully you will be able to find the ones you're missing, and in the meantime, or I guess after that, you'll probably hear from me with a link to watch this recording. Okay, back to questions for Jamie. Could you tell us anything about the wages the servants were paid and how they might compare with others at that time?
Yeah, so Patty Marshall mentions this in a letter that I didn't have in the presentation. It was about $5 a month. I can't speak to what wages were for maybe white workers at that time. I'm not exactly sure what Sam was paying the men that from the community that were working on his farm, white farmers. I'm not sure what, I mean, there are so many account books there that the answers are probably in the Pownalborough Courthouse papers, but they were Katy, Randall, Martha, and Joe Henry Jones were being paid about $5 a month. Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Beth asked, was Katy born into slavery? How much does the archive reveal about her life in Hampton? So it's kind of two questions.
Right. I believe she was. So she was born about 1859, 1858, and um, the the enslaved people at Hampton were not were not freed until about there was a big battle in 1861. And I'm going to embarrass myself because my Civil War history is not top notch. Um, of course, emancipation for all enslaved people came in 1865. But judging by when Katy was born, and because we know her, at least her grandfather, who was sold away south, away from her grandmother, was enslaved, I would make the assumption that Katy was born into enslavement there in the late 1850s. Patty Marshall in Hampton, the general's wife, does a wonderful job of recording family history to tell the Randall and to tell Katy and to tell um, uh, Martha and Joe Henry in her letters. She keeps them updated about their families. And so her letters are another treasure trove of just genealogical information. My hope moving forward with this project is to connect with the descendant communities of these four Hampton children and share with them all the information we have about their family members in the archive. Probably information that may have been lost on account of enslavement. That as this project in my mind gets bigger and bigger, that's definitely one of the touch points for me to reconnect with the descendant communities of these children of Katy and Randall and Martha and Joe Henry.
Thank you. And that answers a couple other questions too regarding your next steps. Linda has left a kind of extensive message here that I'm going to try to pull out the sort of points to share. But essentially, first of all, she says her father attended Hampton in the 1930s. So she's always been interested. And she said she has recently read a book called Beyond, Lift Every Voice and Sing by Paula Marie Sr. And in this book, she learned about the Hampton Institute and domestics coming to Maine, which is interesting. So she mentioned it's a great resource and shared that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Beyond Lift Every Voice and Sing is the
Yeah.
title.
Yeah. That's Linda Critchlow White, past president of the Washington, D.C. chapter of Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. And I'll pull that out for you, Jamie, if you want to follow up. Dave just wanted a quick reminder of Patty's connection to the family again.
Sure. So Patty Marshall, she tripped me up for a long time, right? It's because everybody has nicknames. So she was, I'm gonna have to look. You know
Oh,
what?
while you're talking about her, there's a question about how she ended up in Hampton. So
Yeah. So Patty Marshall. She was a Johnson. So she was related to the Prescotts via John Johnson, who was their uncle. There's Patty. Okay. Martha Ann Johnson. So she was born in Dresden, and later went by the name Patty, which tripped me up for so very long. But a Johnson, so related to the Prescotts via their uncle, John Johnson. And she married this fella here, General James Marshall. He was from Massachusetts somewhere, so two sort of New England folks meeting it and marrying. And he either had been I've got to get my Civil War history poorly here, but had either been stationed in Hampton or wanted to be involved in the creation of the Hampton School. And he eventually became the treasurer, and they moved there. Like he was very much devoted to being involved in the Hampton School. And they spent quite a long time in Hampton. They then became kind of migratory. They ended up in Hawaii for a while and then back in Massachusetts. But a couple of good decades in Hampton. And Patty became very involved in the school as well, and in the local community. I think she saw herself as really just being of as much service as she could to the local formerly enslaved community as best she could be. How are we doing for time? I think we might.
We're doing pretty well. I think I'm kind of looking now through the questions. A lot of the questions have a good amount of overlap, and I think we've covered most things at least a bit. So Jamie, I think that this is probably a good place to end it. We've been just about an hour. I want to tell you how much I appreciated this talk, how much we learned, and as the director of LCHA, I'm especially grateful for the contribution that you've given us that will help us in our interpretation of the Pownalborough Court House. I invite everyone here to visit the courthouse this summer and over the next couple of years while we continue to learn more about these people and kind of begin to infuse our tours with the information that Jamie's been pulling out. Thank you, everybody. I will email you probably early next week with a link to view this online. And any last thoughts, Mr. Tanzer?
I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is a project that's been, as Shannon knows, very close to my heart for couple of years, year and a half now. So I'm delighted that everybody else is interested in hearing these stories too. So thanks to all of you for being here tonight, sincerely.
All right, take care, folks.
Great.
Bye. Good night.